Now for the last call, it's my pleasure to introduce Ansgar Hebborn, a long-term colleague also that I have worked with for a long time. Now to give you some background, when AMNOG was introduced, that Michael Ermisch has talked a little bit about, I was still personally in the industry. And at that time, it was very interesting how the reaction within industry was on the introduction of the new HTA systems, because there were some people saying, this is not good, this is an enemy, this is a very hostile attitude. There were others that really tried, we have to take on this opportunity. This is a new situation, but let's take it as an opportunity to make Europe stronger and not weaker. So to improve efficiency and return on those things. And I would say the whole team behind this also initiative of the European Access Academy are those people that really aim to make this a stronger situation for Europe, that Europe in the end identifies those medicines that are valuable. And Ansgar has a position within Roche and also at EFPIA, where I think from beginning on this was kind of also your mission to really make this a success and see it as an opportunity. So with this one, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Jörg. Thank you for the kind introduction. And thanks for the opportunity to present an industry perspective here. Now, having listened to many of the introductory remarks of other stakeholders here, I don't think that there is so much difference. There's a lot of overlap. But I would agree with Anja Schier, we may still not have the same vision for what this is or what this can deliver, or the same idea if this HTA regulation will deliver against certain hopes that we have, a certain ambition that we have for access. I cannot not to start with Michael Ermisch's slide. He presented an EFPIA slide, the EFPIA weight indicator, which definitely highlights a challenge. I think we in EFPIA published this weight indicator for more than 15 years, and the situation is not improving. This slide highlights substantial gaps in the availability of drugs. So the drugs do not reach the market. Companies are not launching in some markets. They represent access and affordability challenges on this slide. And clearly, I think it's not that this HTA regulation can sort out all of these issues. I think as EFPIA, and we really make this our clear call in all the discussion on the pharmaceutical strategy, the so-called pharmaceutical legislation review, we need to address the root causes of why this EFPIA slide looks like it does. And these causes are quite different between countries. I think the situation in Norway that Anja represented also here looks quite different than the situation in Romania, Bulgaria, or Greece. And I think this needs to be reflected in the measures that we take. We as industry are committed to address these challenges where they exist at the root cause. And so it was good to see that Solange Peters also, I think, provided ideas beyond the HTA or beyond the magnitude of clinical benefits scale when she says that we need to find ways, for example, to bring prices much more in line with the different affordability in the countries. This is about pricing. There are infrastructure challenges. We heard about the Beating Cancer Plan. One ambition is to promote the idea of personalized medicine, which requires specific diagnostic infrastructure. This is about capabilities, infrastructure investments, complementary capabilities in health systems that are just not available. So there's a much broader agenda that we are committed to support. While I speak here, in many of our companies, colleagues are working on the implementation of the HTA regulation. I see quite some colleagues here that I work in EFPIA with on this regulation. Jörg started the day, I think, with the idea, will this be a success story? And he asked me, will this provide added value for innovative medicine? I think that the answer was very clear. I think every speech here we've heard, we have to make this a success. It's not just industry or HTA agencies that are often in the center of the debate, debating with each other, but it's also other stakeholders that I'm really grateful to see also here in this room and also virtually involved, They have to contribute. They're explicitly named in this regulation. There's a place for patients. At the same time, the various plans that we heard about, the strategy, the pharmaceutical strategy, the Beating Cancer plan as a pillar of the EU Health Union, they are, I would still say, high-level defined ambitions. They are flagship initiatives in the pharmaceutical strategy. But the real work, or how they turn out, how they support access, availability, I think that's up to the individual initiatives and the engagement of stakeholders in these initiatives. We heard that the cancer plan explicitly highlights, it has words in there about the HTA regulation, the hope that this will advance, I think, the ambitions of the cancer regulation, which is about reducing inequalities in many different areas of cancer care, prevention, and other areas. And it was in light of this Beating Cancer plan that cancer medicines are in the first wave of introduction. So they will be first in 2025. They will be in the center of experimentation with the pilots. There will not many more pilots between now and 2025. The European Commission representative mentioned this. It will then start with cancer, which is also in our industry pipelines. It's the largest part of what we do. It's developing cancer medicines. There's other areas, definitely, but the cancer area is the biggest. In 2020, we had more than 1,300 cancer medicines in development. Advances in cancer biology, they offer significant opportunities for the development of innovative medicines. In parallel, regulatory pathways have evolved. These regulatory pathways are able to represent and reflect specifics of the medicine that's developed, of the development situations in which it is developed, of the unmet need that exists in the area. I think these efforts, have to be leveraged also in what we do here or in the other areas of access where we have to work on solutions. It cannot be that the HTA regulation here will lead to an additional bottleneck. I think it has to remove bottlenecks where they are. It has to remove the fragmentation that we've heard about. I think Anja presented very well that countries really have very, very different ideas of how to assess medicines. The key ambition of the regulation is to find ways to actively reduce this fragmentation. I think we have to make clear together that the EU approach to these joint clinical assessments is not just an amalgamation of the 27 different systems that we have. And sometimes I sense the discussion is about how do we carry everything from the countries, what they currently do, put it into a very short time frame and produce it next to each other. So we simply export, if we don't do it, we simply export this fragmentation to an EU level. And in this situation, if this scenario would unfold, we have time to prevent this, this regulation would not add additional value. So one key area is to develop a true joint European clinical assessment framework, as mentioned. The EMA has achieved this. It has taken time. I think Anja mentioned this, 10 years. We had already, I think, 15 years here with UNETA. So maybe we can be faster in moving towards this single European framework for joint clinical assessment. The EMA has achieved this. It operates on a single clinical assessment framework, a benefit-risk framework, quite successfully. The other key challenge, and so I hope we have also here member state representatives, we heard some, which is good. I think it's important that in the next 2 years, it's only 2 years that de facto we still have, the basis for using the outputs of this regulation is created in the countries. This may require legislative action or other measures to actively secure that they can be used, that they can be as an effective use as possible of these EU outputs. So these are, I think, the key pillars of what we really need to keep an eye on, the limited time that we have. Maybe a few other points that are critical. I think it needs the systematic involvement of the expertise and experience of all stakeholders, not just in the implementation phase, but also in the active phase of this regulation. It needs a recognition of industry or health technology developers as a key contributor in joint clinical assessments. I think that's currently not there in the initial discussions that we see. It needs sufficient joint scientific advice capacity. Michael Ermisch presented on this. I think the idea that it's better to invest early into helping companies finding ways with the regulatory pathways, but also with the HTA and payer decision-making to prepare for relevant evidence. This requires that sufficient capacity is there when companies want to access this. This is currently not the case, and I don't see it going forward to be the case. It needs a methodological framework for HTA here, these joint clinical assessments, that can reflect the specifics of the context in which medicines are developed. I think that's clearly also stated in the regulation, certainly in the recitals. There is the idea, for example, that the framework needs to be able to address situations when some data may not be available at the time of launch. The regulation mentions explicitly real-world evidence as a way to potentially bridge these evidence gaps. It needs a functional interface between the regulatory framework of the EMA and the HTA environment here, the EU HTA environment, being mindful and respecting the roles, the different roles and remits of the EMA and those that are in charge of payment. It's different roles and responsibilities. Still, they're part of the same pathway, critical path. It's important that this is an efficient collaboration. And it needs systematic monitoring. So the original question that Jörg asked was, will the EU HTA regulation provide added value for innovative medicines? I think it's important that we chart out a way, certain elements and metrics that can really show that it does this, that it does not only add incremental work for companies that are willing to do this and currently in parallel plan and prepare for this, but that it ultimately does something to decision-making and also for patient access. And I think there is a need to measure this substantially more than what's currently defined in the regulation itself. We as industry are committed to support this and to work with other stakeholders, those that are in the room here in this initiative, but clearly also beyond. Thank you.
Thanks, Ansgar, and to all the speakers for those great impulse presentations.